Alchemical Tech Revolution is sponsored by Litter Robot. Hi, friends. I'm very blessed to have Litter Robot as a sponsor. If you're like me and you have cats, we have 3 of them actually, you know how busy life can be and how difficult it can be to follow up on cleaning the litter pan. So I highly recommend Litter Robot. We got our first Litter Robot a couple years ago, and let me tell you, it's no fuss, no muss, no mess. All you have to do is empty the bag when it sends you a little notification in the app, and you just put the bag out in the garbage, and that's it. You tie it up, throw it out. There's no odor, nothing. Check out the product here at the link given in the video. You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McRoy. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are around the world. Tonight, we're going to discuss the Singularity and the Transhuman apocalypse. Well, certainly we are approaching some very interesting times in the history of the world, folks. We're living in interesting days for sure, and we see at the heart of everything going on in this world this philosophy known as transhumanism and the culmination into the things that they want to lead us into what they call the post-human future. This is all about the hubris of those select few people in positions of power in this world and their desire to become, in no uncertain terms, the gods of this place. They seek immortality, they seek total power and control over every aspect of nature and mankind himself, the minds and the souls of all beings here. And they think they could do this through the use of advanced technologies, and we're witnessing much of this going on today, the slow roll towards this notion of a transhuman singularity, which many of the experts are predicting around the year 2049. And when and if that happens, we will see the loss of human freedoms and human dignities like we have never witnessed before in the history of the world. Even though they may succeed for a short time with their plans, it will not last long, I assure you, because nature always self-corrects, and violating the natural laws put in place by our Creator have consequences, and usually doing such things results in catastrophic collapse, as we see with the story of the Tower of Babel, and we've discussed this before in the past, but tonight we're going to look into this whole notion of a transhuman apocalypse and this coming singularity. What is this going to look like? It's hard to say for certain. If the people in positions of power who want to steer and influence these things have their way, I suspect it'll probably look very much like the movie Ready Player One in the near future, where man will essentially spend most of his time jacked into the Matrix, if you want to use that terminology, will be distracted in the virtual reality goings-on of everything and living in squalor and filth in the meantime. You will own nothing and you'll be happy, according to Klaus Schwab. This is what they envision for our future. Now, they have a different viewpoint for themselves. These elitist class of people, they think they have much better outcomes for themselves. But this is what they envision for the rest of us. They want us enslaved to the system. They want us constantly attached to the computer in this virtual reality type setting. They want us to find all of our satisfaction in that non-existent reality, that fantasy-based reality. That's where they seek to keep our minds occupied and not actually pursuing anything in the real physical world here. They just want us entertained. And what does the word entertainment mean when you break it down to its etymological roots? And we've done this before too. Enter, to go in. Tain, to grab hold of. Meant the mind. To go in and grab hold of the mind. And certainly that's what we've been conditioned into. It's the old Roman bread and circuses ideology once again. When you keep that in mind, you understand the old tricks are the best tricks. If they keep us endlessly entertained and give us just enough subsistence food supply to live, we will not rebel. That's the whole notion here. If you give people choices for food and entertainment, oftentimes they will become content with their lot in life. And if you limit their variety, they will adapt to that. The human being is a very adaptable creature. This is understood. These people in positions of power in this world understand human psychology extremely well. And they know that man will adapt to whatever situation is thrown at him. And as long as it's not thrown all in at once, in one giant upheaval, he will adapt over time. So that's why they use a lot of these very slow-moving types of agendas, what seems to be slow-moving. Little increments at a time where they take away your human freedoms and dignities, and you scarcely notice because of the slow pace at which they do so. Now, in recent years, they've really ramped these things up, and I think they've pushed a little too hard, and they're getting a lot of pushback because of that. But they're doubling down anyway. They seem to think they have such a lockstep on control of the human being at this point that they don't care if you realize that they're manipulating you or not. They don't care anymore. That's why all of this information is much more readily available now. They think that they have such a lock on things that it doesn't matter if you know, that you're not going to change anything. And are they right about this? I don't necessarily think they are, but they seem to think that they are. And there are vast numbers of people who will play the old game and go along to get along. And they'll just seek their subsistence living and their entertainment to keep their minds occupied with things of no real importance. Well, these agendas go on behind the scenes without their realization of such or their consent to these things. But see, it's okay because they could watch their football game. Do you see how this works and how this operates? And it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse as we get more technologically advanced here in the public sector. Now, many of these technologies that have been developed in the secret special access programs of the black budget community are in existence today, and they're being shoehorned into modern culture in the public forum in many ways. But they do this subtly and slowly. They introduce these technologies to the public sector. And they do so as the guise of being useful. And many of these things are useful. So they'll find as many different civilian applications for these weaponized technologies as possible. And they'll put them out there for development by many of these large corporations. And they'll find useful reasons to adopt these technologies, and they'll usually give you promises of, improved health outcomes, improved lifestyle, more convenience, these types of things. They will present you with all the positive aspects of any given technology without telling you the negative impact that this will have, because they've built the negative impact purposely into it, all for the purposes of control. Now, this is about, primarily at the heart of it, with the transhumanist notion of things, the self-guided evolution of man. That is what they view this as. And they think that you are just a stupid animal, and you need their help to get to this next level, to get through this transhumanist singularity, and arise to the state of post-human. They don't think you're spiritually evolved enough to get there on your own. So they do everything in their power to help you to achieve this spiritual enlightenment. And this is their viewpoint. And what they do is actually the inverse of that. What they do is not uplifting. Let's put it that way. It's degrading. It's dehumanizing. It's the complete opposite or inverse of what they claim to do. Now, they claim they have your best interest in mind, but most certainly they do not. I assure you of that. Now, there's different levels of this cryptocracy that have influences and sway in this world. At the very tippy top of the power structure, there lie a group of dark occultists who run things, and beneath them are their useful idiots, the technocrats, and many of those are the ones who steer and influence some of these technological developments towards this transhumanist notion of things, towards this singularity event that they are most certainly looking for at this point. And they don't usually have the first clue about the occult side of this or the spiritual aspects to this. They're just pushing forward in the physical material world paradigm here, trying to achieve these promises that have been given to them of this whole transhumanist notion. And they're all based on lies, deceptions, and misdirections. Now, certainly technologies can be a useful thing. Technology, in and of itself, is a tool. And there's nothing wrong with using tools. It's all a matter of who's wielding the tools, how they get used. The problem, and I find myself repeating this quite often, so bear with me. If you've listened for any length of time and you've heard me repeat this stuff over and over, you need to understand there's new listeners who haven't heard this before. The problem is those that are steering and directing the development of these technologies, by and large, have ill intentions for the bulk of us. They don't have good intentions for us. And therefore, these tools are being misused, misapplied in very many ways against the public at large. So we have this transhumanist notion of things that is always behind the scenes going on by these people in positions of power who you could call the cryptocracy. So that would be the connection between these dark occultists who run things and their minions, the technocrats. You could lump them all together in what I call the cryptocracy. This is actually a term that was coined by Michael Hoffman, and I think it's an apt description because the cryptocracy, they utilize some of these old occult concepts to leverage certain energetic principles against the masses. Now, many of the people who participate in this cryptocracy, they don't have the first clue about the occult side of this, so they are the useful idiots, and these are your technocrats. These are the ones that operate in kind of the middle management section here of things, and these are the ones that you see as being the top of the power structure here. The Committee of 300, the families of the black nobility of Europe, and these royal family bloodlines that seem to always interpenetrate in these things. And some of the connections cross over. They cross over into these occult fraternities and stuff like that at the top as well. So there is some interconnectedness between those things. But most of the people leveraging these technological developments don't have the first clue about the occult side, and they are just the useful idiots. And these are your technocrats who push and steer and direct things. And oftentimes they think they're doing you a service by building some of these back doors into these various technological systems. They think that it's necessary to have a surveillance state because there are enemies out there who would seek to harm you. There's political factions and nations around the world that are in opposition to us here in the West, and these are the claims that they make. So it's for your own good. It's for your own protection. They need that surveillance network. It's not to spy on you. It's to keep you safe. If you don't have anything to hide, what do you have to fear? And this is the type of notion that they put in place. But certainly they track all your data on the back end of that, and they customize social engineering campaigns directly to you on an individual level at this point with this. What do you think social media is about? But at any rate, that's enough of the gearing up here towards this push, towards the singularity, and what we're calling the transhuman apocalypse here, because I do think it's going to be apocalyptic in its advent. But it might be a very different looking apocalypse than what you have pictured, and what I have pictured, and what we've been warned about in the old religious texts. Now, certainly, we hear about things like this in the book of Revelation, and we're given all kinds of descriptions as to what is going on in the book of Revelation, and we have all of these notions of things that we see, and it's confusing, it's exciting, it's action-packed, and it looks very much like it would be something that would be recognizable to people on the surface level. But when you begin to realize that John the Revelator, who was giving us these descriptions of things in the book of Revelation, was viewing things in the spiritual realm and describing those to us, you begin to realize that maybe in the physical material world here, these advents of the Revelation will appear quite differently than how they're described in the Bible, but the spirit beneath it is the same. Now, we could apply that mode of thinking to this transhumanist apocalypse idea. It's not going to look so flashy here in physical material world reality. I don't think it's going to be beasts coming up out of the ground, out of the bottomless pit, and locusts, giant locusts stinging mankind and stuff. Things like that are described in the book of Revelation. I don't think that's described in the physical. That's the spiritual. In the physical, it's probably going to look very mundane and boring. It's probably going to look like some dude sitting in a chair with a virtual reality headset strapped to his face for 20 hours a day. That's probably what it's going to look like. Jacked into the Matrix, distracted, almost soulless in a sense. And that is what they envision for us. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and we're going to continue our study from a book titled Transhumanism, a Grimoire of Alchemical Agendas by Drs. Joseph P. Farrell and Scott D. Hart. Now, like I have said in the past, this is a great book, if you could get a hold of it. Gives you a very good picture of how exactly this whole transhumanist notion ties back to alchemical agendas, to the old mystery school teachings, to the Hermetic philosophy, to many of these older ideas, the older natural sciences. And when you begin to realize that these older natural sciences, the alchemy, has been misapplied and inverted from what the original intent was, then you could begin to understand everything. And I know I've said in the past here, and I'll continue to repeat it, if you want a true definition of Satanism, it is the inversion principle. 100%. And certainly, that's what this whole transhumanist notion of the singularity and this coming apocalypse is about. But let's get into the reading here. So we're going to read from a portion of the book here called The Alchemo-Mineral Man, the Transhumanist Techno-Androgyny and the Apocalypse. And it opens with a couple of quotes here from some famous authors, the first of which being Arthur C. Clarke. And Arthur C. Clarke says, quote, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic," end quote. And then there's a second quote here from Percy Shelley. Quote, "There is a secret known to thee and to none else of living things which may transfer the scepter of heaven, the fear of which perplexes the supreme," end quote. And that is from Mercury to Prometheus, from Prometheus Unbound by Percy Shelley. So we have this notion, of course, always of Prometheus, and this is central to the Luciferian philosophy that underlies the transhumanist philosophy. And many don't realize the transhumanist philosophy at its core is Luciferian. It certainly is. And I find it kind of ironic that we have many different transhumanist societies around the world that profess some other religious context to them. Like there's Christian transhumanists, there's Mormon transhumanists, there's all different kinds. There's Muslim transhumanists. There's Buddhic transhumanists. There's all these different notions of things where they see transhumanism as being the fulfillment of all of these different religious ideologies. And this I find hugely problematic. They say transhumanism is the fulfillment of religion, that religion is a precursor to transhumanism. This is what they believe and what they talk about in these philosophical groups that promote the transhumanist ideology. But anyway, let's read into the works here of Drs. Hart and Dr. Farrell. If, as Arthur C. Clarke famously observed, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, then it is equally true that the goals of modern science and technology are indistinguishable from alchemy and hermeticism. Those goals, for science and alchemy alike, are the mastery over the physical medium, the environment of man, and over mankind himself, and this is nowhere better illustrated than in the transhumanist speculations concerning what is being called the Singularity. I'm going to pause for a moment here. So we're heading to this moment of what they call the Singularity. And certainly we see all of these different same tropes that are very, very old being reapplied with a more modern spin on them. And this is what it's all about. It's about transforming man's image of himself into what these transhumanists want it to be. And we've talked at length before about the importance of the image. The image is central to manifestation in this physical material world reality. The image is the precursor to all things. This is another hugely important idea that is often overlooked by many people. Now, you could say, well, what do you mean by the image? Well, this all has to do with the power of the human mind and thought forms. Everything begins as a thought. All manifestation begins as a thought. If you can imagine it, it can become a reality. That's the central notion here. This is something that was known in metaphysics in times past, and it's known today in one regard or another. Why do you think science fiction writing largely becomes science fact later on? Because if you can imagine it, you can make it so. If that term, singularity, sounds apocalyptic, that's because it is, for the transhumanists intend, consciously and deliberately, to transform man, and to do so specifically by creating the techno-androgynous fusion of man and mineral, of man and machine, and to do that by the application of every technological artifice available or conceivable. They speak openly of an apocalyptic future transcending evolution, human nature itself, and of a future, much of it already dawning, in which technologies allow mankind to engineer human evolution itself. It is, in short, a Frankenstein scenario, for as Joel Guru, a researcher of the transhumanist agenda, put it, quote, "The inflection point at which we have arrived is one in which we are increasingly seizing the keys to all creation," end quote. But what exactly is the transhumanist view? Are these keys to all creation? And what is their history? Who really is ultimately behind their development? We already encountered in the previous chapter a partial answer to the last question, with the private corporate interest represented by the Rockefeller Foundation pursuing a wholesale scientific agenda to engineer a new mankind. But there is also another significant player in the development of these technologies. But again, what are these technologies and who else is behind their development? And we're going to pause for a moment here. So remember, we have private corporate interests who are vested in developing these technologies, and many think tank groups of the so-called elite class who have steered and directed the development of these technologies, the Rockefeller Foundation being one at the heart of it, the Josiah Macy Foundation another. The founders of cybernetics have also been heavily vested in this. So there's a lot of corporate interest, there's a lot of big moneyed interests in pushing and pursuing this. But there's other players involved, and this is where the military-industrial complex crosses bounds with the transhumanist ideology, because we're going to talk about DARPA's GRINS, a brief review of the background of transhumanist technologies, the keys to creation. Transhumanists call the technologies that are the keys to creation the GRIN technologies, Grin, standing for genetic, robotic, information processing, and nanotechnological processes. These, the transhumanists stress, overlap and may be combined in any number of ways, and it is precisely this intermingling of various technologies that is creating a curve of change, unlike anything we humans have ever seen. It is important to stress an obvious, though often overlooked point about these four technologies, namely, that they are each taken individually transformative, and each hold the potential to change human nature itself. Taken together or engineered and employed in various combinations, the transformation is even more sweeping. Succinctly put, the GRIN technologies are transformational. They are alchemical. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. And here is where Drs. Hart and Farrell are not wrong. These most certainly are alchemical. They're transformative. They can transform and transmute man into something entirely different, and the world around us as well. All of nature, and this is what the transhumanist goal is, to transform all of our reality into something more manipulatable and controllable by themselves, by those at the top of the power structure. So remember those four things: genetic, robotic, information processing, and nanotechnology processes. Nanotechnology is one of the keys to all of this. And there's an awful lot of censorship that goes on regarding nanotechnologies. But let's continue. So, indeed, Joel Guru points out that each of these technologies is aimed not just at the surface of mankind, but to employ that topological metaphor once again at his interior, at his very essence or nature, such that it is possible to envision the technological fusions of alchemo-mineral man, the fusion of man and mineral, of man and machine, the next fusion in our ladder of alchemical ascent. For these technologies allow mergers with, quote, our minds, our memories, our metabolisms, and our personalities, our progeny, and perhaps our souls, end quote. To the extent we are now capable of engineering our own evolution, with human nature itself being the philosopher's stone to be transformed from its current base metal status to the pure gold of something transcending its own biology. Gonna pause for a moment here, so notice this language being used here. It is alchemical in nature, and this is certainly the fulfillment of the great work, at least in the view of those who control things in this world, these dark occultists who run things. They see transhumanism as the ultimate fulfillment of their great work, but it is a perverted and inverse great work from what the original intentions have always been from time immemorial. All the good things have been twisted and turned evil, and woe to him that calls evil good and good evil. We've heard this. And they call this good, and they pursue this as being a good thing, and they present it to you as being good. But it's perverse. It's the great lie from the Garden of Eden. Man cannot be God, but they seem to think otherwise. Let's read on. So, a form of magical reversal of the Tower of Babel moment. Ray Kurzweil, one of the leading thinkers exploring these possibilities, minced no words when he observed that the technologies would ultimately merge, quote, our biological thinking with the non-biological intelligence we are creating, end quote. That is, that human consciousness itself is alchemically transformed. As Kurzweil observes, the possibility exists that our non-biological intelligence component will eventually be trillions of times more powerful than our biological component. Kurzweil also minces no words on the magical nature of modern science, and specifically the ability of computers to game various scenarios and modify our environment. And he says, quote, this is from Ray Kurzweil, quote, a word on magic. When I was reading the Tom Swift Jr. books, I was also an avid magician. I enjoyed the delight of my audiences in experiencing apparently impossible transformations of reality. In my teen years, I replaced my parlor magic with technology projects. I discovered that unlike mere tricks, technology does not lose its transcendent power when its secrets are revealed. I am often reminded of Arthur C. Clarke's third law that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Consider J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter stories from this perspective. These tales may be imaginary, but they are not unreasonable visions of our world as it will exist only a few decades from now. Essentially, all of the Potter magic will be realized through technologies. Playing Quidditch and transforming people and objects into other forms will be feasible in full immersion virtual reality environments, as well as in real reality using nanoscale devices. More dubious is the time reversal as described in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, although serious proposals have been put forward for accomplishing something along these lines without giving rise to causality paradoxes, at least for bits of information, which essentially is what we comprise. Consider that Harry Potter unleashes his magic by uttering the right incantation. Of course, discovering and applying these incantations are no simple matters. Harry and his colleagues need to get to the sequence, procedures, and emphasis exactly correct. The process is precisely our experience with technology. Our incantations are the formulas and algorithms underlying our modern-day magic. With just the right sequence, we can get a computer to read a book out loud, understand human speech, anticipate and prevent a heart attack, or predict the movement of a stock market holding. If an incantation is just slightly off mark, the magic is greatly weakened or does not work at all. End quote. That was from Ray Kurzweil, folks. Are you beginning to understand a few things? It most certainly is misapplied alchemical procedures being done here. He's equating the use of technology to being synonymous with the use of magic. And these two things are very much interrelated. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. That's what Arthur C. Clarke said. He's not wrong. Magic in and of itself, I guess, could be considered a type of technology, a very old technology. You see, there are tried and true principles that have been adhered to with this. Thus, it has survived the test of time and is still with us today, although we're taught in our modern culture to think of these things as nonsensical and silly. But most certainly, there's something there. It works to some degree or another. So we have this notion of things from even people like Ray Kurzweil. Let's read on. This technological transformation of mankind will, in turn, transform every institution and aspect of human life, from sexuality to spirituality. Mortality itself will be in our own hands, for the technologies will allow one to live as long as we want, a subtly different statement from saying we will live forever. In other words, the ultimate goal of transhumanism is nothing less than the scientific and technological reversal of the Tower of Babel moment of history, of the fall of man, and the alchemical ascent back up the Skalai Kylie, the ladder to heaven. So man, the microcosm, becomes the macrocosm. That's the next portion of the book here. And we'll see, once again, we're applying the same old hermetic concepts, once again, as above, so below, as within, so without. Man being the microcosm of the universe, the macrocosm. All of these things interrelate in many ways, and this whole philosophy undergirds much of the transhumanist thought in the modern era. An inventory of these keys to creation, the rungs on the ladder ascending back to heaven, so to speak, is breathtaking. At the head of the list is the alchemical fusion of man and mineral itself, in the form of implanted computer chips to enhance the abilities of humans to interface directly with computers. Already, Duke University has a telekinetic monkey named Belle, a small owl monkey with a computer implant in her brain, allowing her to move a mechanical arm hundreds of miles away from her actual location, simply by thinking it. The implants themselves are the latest in sophistication, being probes much finer than sewing threads aligned with individual neurons, with the region of her brain controlling motor skills. The implications of this are, in turn, equally breathtaking, for it means that any human being, a microcosm, will be capable of himself or herself becoming a macrocosm, of literally stretching out via computer interfaces to control robotic space probes millions of miles away. The next step is towards true computer-enhanced telepathy and interface, to rig a distant machine such that it can pipe what it is sensing directly into the brain of its human host. The goal is to seamlessly merge mind and machine, engineering human evolution so as to directly project and amplify the power of our thoughts throughout the universe. I'm going to pause for a moment here. So this sounds like a very big prospect, doesn't it? And most certainly, this is a misapplication of the old Hermetic principles. You see, man, the microcosm, can transcend into the macrocosm. It's all about a collective hive mind, ladies and gentlemen. This is the misapplication thereof. This is what they're seeking to do with this transhumanist notion. And it's very nefarious because it sounds very liberating and transcendent, doesn't it? Well, you could become so very much evolved here by merging with this technology that you can have influence over the entire reality. What you need to understand, though, is the ontological self will not be part of that. It'll just be an amalgamation of perhaps your memories and your thoughts, which are not you, by the way, combined with the memories and thoughts of others in a single hive mind, directed and controlled by an artificial intelligence. And this becomes very troubling and problematic, doesn't it? Because, like I said, the ontological self will not reside there. The spirit of man will not reside with that. The soul of man will not be there. It'll be a cheap knockoff of you. It will not truly be your consciousness that transcends. You see, that's all a lie to sell the whole proposition to you. You will not live forever. You will not live for as long as you want, as they promise you, even though they make some slight differentiations in the way they talk about it. It's not going to be you. Let's be blunt about that. You're not going to be the ghost in the machine. Now, you will have probably your memories, your thoughts, your personality will be in the machine, simulated in this collective hive mind, but you won't be in control, ladies and gentlemen. It won't be you. It's nothing more than a massive culling program if you buy into this singularity idea. You will be culled, and only a cheap knockoff of you will remain, and will be incorporated into this AI system, this collective hive mind. And I could tell you with quite a bit of assurance that likely at the end of the day, when this is all said and done, when and if they achieve this goal of producing this collective hive mind, it will name itself Lucifer. I don't doubt that for an instant. But let's go ahead and we'll continue because we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Downloading and uploading memories and direct modification of consciousness and behavior. All of this points out implicit promises and dangers. The promise is obvious enough. People with weakened or lost motor skills would, through this new kind of prosthesis, be able to control artificial limbs, or take the hippocampus in the brain, the structure that is crucial for processing and long-term memory. Neurophysiologists at the University of Southern California are currently attempting to map the signals structure of this crucial region of the human brain. So successful have they been, they have developed a mathematical model of the transformations performed by layers of the hippocampus and programmed the model onto a chip. Additionally, these scientists have a plan, which is to test the chip in animals by disabling their hippocampus, recording the loss of memory, and then by implanting a chip to see if the mental function can be restored. If successful, this technology would do an end run around epilepsy, Alzheimer's disease, etc. It is, as Kurzweil aptly observes, a kind of reverse engineering of individual human brains. Indeed, he points out, the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences, based in Munich, has already engineering a computer chip that allows human neurons to be grown on a computer chip, interfacing directly with it. The same institute has also developed technologies that allow it to detect when specific neurons are fired, and this same technology also allows them to cause or prevent certain neurons from firing. In short, to modify human consciousness and behavior directly via computer implants. And I'm going to pause for a moment here just to remind you that this book was published, copyright 2013, folks. So these things that are being talked about here are very likely far in advance of what they were when Doctors Hart and Farrell were writing this book. And they were probably far ahead even before that, because when you realize that many of these old technologies, well, they are old, they've been tied up in black programs for a very long time, and the things we see as the most technologically advanced in the public sector are likely bare minimum 30 to 50 years old. They've been put through their paces by the military-industrial complex, weaponized in every possible way before they were released for public consumption, and the things we're seeing going on in places like this at these various universities have likely been done by secret contractors long, long ago. And now it's just becoming to the point where it's seeing the light of day in the public purview. That's where we're at. So when you consider that, think about what the state of technology actually could be today. Education itself will change profoundly once these technologies are widely available, for such direct downloading of information means that individuals will be able to disseminate and acquire information much more quickly. This, coupled with the extension of human life itself, will mean that human knowledge will grow exponentially within a given generation and individual. We will be approaching the state ascribed to the gods in the ancient texts. Schools, if they exist at all, may consist of downloading stations, and the typical school day may consist of no more than 5 minutes of downloading what now takes an entire day of lecturing to do. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. Now think about the profoundness of this statement. You see, there's an entire industry that will be wiped out by facing these technologies. And this is just one example, but this is one that I don't think they're going to let go to the wayside for right now. The potential to just download information directly into your brain is staggering, to say the least. You wouldn't need to go to school for 13 years and then go to college for X amount of years for some type of specialty. You see, it could just be an almost instantaneous knowledge transfer. Data. These are the kinds of promises that they hold out with this stuff. And honestly, I think a lot of it is based on deception. I think there may be some potential for these things to become a type of reality, but here's the problem. First, you have to link the analog to the digital. We as human beings are analog beings. We are not digital beings. That's why they need to develop this artificial intelligence, this neocortex, to make that possible. But the problem is, you still need to have that connection between the analog and the digital. And it seems they're working on that by combining neurons with these computer chips. They're working on bridging that gap. Now, is this something that can be done? And is it something that should be done? That's the other question here. There's a lot of dangers in this ideology that befall this. And a lot of the dangers that have to do with this, they supersede the bounds of our natural, physical, material world reality that we know and acknowledge here. There's spiritual ramifications to this. The very nature of consciousness itself comes into play here. Is consciousness really, truly, nothing more than the electrochemical byproduct of the brain and brainstem? If that's the case, then this could potentially be a real technology that can be used to extend human life and cognitive function. But if consciousness is something that transcends that, and I most firmly and assuredly believe that it is, then this is just trying to develop a fancier radio tuner. And if that's the case, is it going to function better than the original tuner that we have, that our Creator developed and put into place in this world? Can man build a better man than God has? Can a creation ever be greater than its creator? This is a big question to ask. And most certainly these transhumanists seem to think they can do a better job at this. But I don't think that's the case. In their hubris, they think it's possible. They think they can understand the secrets of consciousness, the secrets of reality, when we've scarcely scratched the surface here. Our modern world that we see, that we think we so adequately understand, we don't even have the first clue. We don't even know what we don't know. But this is the hubris of man. We think we've made such exponential leaps in technology and knowledge that we can fine-tune our reality to suit us. Man is adaptable, yes, but we have limitations. And these people don't seem to want to accept that we have our limitations, that we cannot possibly comprehend some things in our human condition. And they seem to think that these machines will help them to do so, and that parity with the machine is the answer, and that we can become God through this parity with the machine. But it's a lie, ladies and gentlemen. And we'll get to that, but let's read on. But the dangers are equally, if not more, breathtaking, for one could program almost any memory into such a chip, and thereby make an individual's personality, memories, and gain a new level of influence over their behavior. This opens up other possibilities for the emerging alchemo-mineral man. Kurzweil sees the possibility that entire individual brains could be scanned to upload an individual's personality and memories into a new body once the old one wore out, giving rise to the possibility of extreme biological longevity for a particular individual. But why bother? With the emerging genetic technologies, replacement organs unique to the individual can be grown for harvesting and transplant when the old ones wore out. Nanomachines would also contribute to life extension simply by repairing diseased cells or tissue on a cell-by-cell basis. So we have all of these promises, once again, folks, of these medical breakthroughs that can be achieved ostensibly through this technology. And this is the promise that they hold out. This is the carrot they dangle before you to get you to accept this transhumanist incursion upon you. The next section lists the group consciousness, or Roddenberry's Borg. Kurzweil points out yet another possibility that will emerge with the new technologies of direct neurophysiological manipulation. And this is once again from Kurzweil, quote, Experience beamers will send the entire flow of their sensory experiences, as well as the neurological correlates of their emotional reactions, out onto the web, just as people today beam their bedroom images from their webcams. A popular pastime will be to plug into someone else's sensory emotional beam and experience what it's like to be that person. There will also be a vast selection of archived experiences to choose from, with virtual experience design another new art form. The most important application of circa 2030 nanobots will be literally to expand our minds through the merger of biological and non-biological intelligence. The first stage will be to augment 100 trillion very slow interneuronal connections with high-speed virtual connections via nanorobot communication. This will provide us with the opportunity to greatly boost out pattern recognition abilities, memories, and overall thinking capacity, as well as to directly interface with powerful forms of non-biological intelligence. The technology will also provide wireless communication from one brain to another, end quote. That's from Kurzweil, folks, once again. So you see, he's talking about circa 2030 nanotechnologies, where they'll be able to connect your brain to the internet and you can experience what it's like to be somebody else. These are the things they're talking about. You can tap into their memories and their emotional responses and how they felt in that moment, and actually know what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. Now, this is another interesting thought form here to look at. Think back to the movie Total Recall, the original movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger back in, 1991 or so that they made that movie, Total Recall. It was all about artificial memories implanted in him and whole artificial personality. Wasn't even himself. And it leaves you scratching your head at the end of the movie, wondering which portion of it was the artificial and which was the real. Was it just this regular guy who wanted to have this adventure vacation to the planet Mars, and that was the memory that was implanted in him? Or was it vice versa, where it was his memory really suppressed and he was this secret agent guy in reality? Leaves you scratching your head wondering. If you've never seen that movie, go back and watch it. Was interesting, especially for the time, because this is a type of revelation of the method, telling you about this transhumanist notion of things in the coming future. How they could manipulate your mind in ways you could scarcely realize, to the point where you don't even know who you are. Think about that. Or you could experience somebody else's life experiences. Now, it's an interesting way to think. And this is certainly something that's been put out there by Kurzweil and others in the transhumanist movement here. But I don't know how much of that is going to see fruition here in this reality. You see, this is all based upon assumptions and lies and manipulations. We don't understand the real nature of consciousness itself. And if we don't understand the real nature of consciousness itself, how is it that we can achieve these very things? I don't think it's going to be possible in the ways they're describing here, because there is something about consciousness itself that supersedes or transcends the physical reality. I like to use the analogy of a radio tuner. Essentially, we are attuned to this one frequency, and we manifest in this receiver in which we live that we would call our human body, our human mind, and we are just the receiver. But the signal exists elsewhere. The signal emanates from elsewhere and transcends through the physical medium here, through the etheric medium, and our tuner is attuned to it. Now, if you look at this analogy, and it's not perfect, but it's a good analogy, I think this is a better way of thinking about consciousness. Your consciousness exists outside of the receiver, much like a radio station. If you use a radio, you tune it to a station and you could hear the music coming through the radio on that one station. But if that station, if that radio set you have goes out of tune, if you turn the channel or something, you get static and you pick up another station. It's another signal. Now, does that mean if you turn the station off that it doesn't exist anymore? Or that you've changed the radio into something else? No, it doesn't. It's picking up the signal. That's the only thing here. So consciousness itself, I think, is on par with the signal. And we are just the tuner. So changing the tuner doesn't necessarily change the signal. So you're not going to significantly alter your consciousness or who or what you really truly actually are by enhancing or changing this tuner. Do you understand what I'm saying? Augmenting the human brain and the human body is not going to somehow augment your spirit or soul or your consciousness. If anything, it's just going to cut off that original signal from the tuner and tune in something else, some type of an amplification, and invite in perhaps something else in its stead. A cheap knockoff. So keep that in mind, and this is how we can understand a little better how this could be so deceptive. Because in our modern science, we don't acknowledge the spiritual. We don't acknowledge the signal that is consciousness. We only acknowledge the physical tuner that receives the signal. So let's read on here. In other words, the World Wide Web will become exactly the kind of super brain or super consciousness long ago envisioned by Nikola Tesla. This highlights yet another danger, for how does one maintain one's individual personality and freedom in such a world, given the ability of these technologies to directly modify memory, behavior, and individual consciousness? And who will be the system administrators or operators in this brave new world? What is being engineered, in other words, is literally a technological version of the corporate person, where it is no longer a legal metaphor but a technological reality, a single, distributed, and interconnected brain, according to a study of the U.S. National Science Foundation and the U.S. Department of Commerce. As we shall see momentarily, it is precisely such questions that have led some transhumanists to question whether the coming brave new world is in fact the heaven that others maintain it to be, for what is really being advocated is the alchemical version of a real, genuine telepathy via technology. And I'm going to pause for a moment there, folks. And this is where I'll say winner, winner, chicken dinner for Doctors Hart and Farrell. They're asking the right question. Who's going to be the system administrators or operators? And what will be the real nature of this? Will we really have individual personality and freedom in such a world where they could modify your memory, your behavior, your consciousness itself into a hive mind? Think about that. Let's read on here, because the next section, and we'll see how this all crosses over, is DARPA's quest for the transhumanist super soldier. Have you ever wondered why super soldiers are prevalent in modern entertainment culture? The whole idea thereof. Well, folks, buckle your seatbelts. Let's read on. As will be evident, all of the aforementioned technological possibilities have potential military applications, and no government agency on Earth is more aware of this than is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA. Briefly stated, transhumanist potentials also represent the possibility of super soldiers. This quest, at least in modern times, began in part with the arms race spurred by the Cold War, and with the goal of trying to do a technological end run around thermonuclear weapons to make wars between the major powers fightable and winnable again. To gain an entry into the sort of bizarre, out-of-the-box thinking that DARPA normally engages in, consider only whales or dolphins and the following chain of reasoning. Number 1. Whales and dolphins are sea-dwelling mammals. Number 2. As such, they can never sleep, at least in the conventional sense, for if they slept as land-dwelling mammals do, they would drown. Number 3, therefore, their neurophysiological processes are different and possibly of value to create a human soldier that would need far less sleep or no sleep at all. Number 4, research has shown that when whales and dolphins are sleeping, one half of their brain is awake and working while the other half is asleep. And this leads to the question and the conclusion that DARPA drew. And the question and conclusion that they drew is, what would happen if humans could control which portion of their brain is working while another portion recharges? DARPA's Continuous Assisted Performance Program, or CAP. Their mission brief is to discover what happens and how to do it. DARPA's CAP program has already conjectured that this single transformation of mankind would lead to fundamental changes in the pace, timing, and length of military operations. It would be, in terms of military parlance, a force multiplier, especially against an enemy that did not have the benefit of such technologies. Or suppose that through genetic enhancements or nanotechnology, one breath of oxygen would permit a soldier to run for 15 minutes or carry his own weight in a backpack. Or imagine X-ray goggles like Superman, or exoskeletons to enhance strength and allow a soldier to leap a tall building in a single bound. These are not the comic book fantasies of yesteryear, but technologies actively being investigated by DARPA now. Projects are already underway to design an exoskeleton with a computer program reading an individual's muscle movements and transmitting these to the exoskeleton, which greatly amplifies the movements. Moreover, if the exoskeleton were immediately directed by the brain-computer interfaces referred to previously, the response of the exoskeleton would be as virtually instantaneous as the human body's response to the brain. It is yet another example of the projected superpowers of transhumanist alchemo-mineral man. Indeed, one DARPA projects manager and future predictor summed up the quest for the transhumanist super soldier in no uncertain terms, and here is the quote. Quote, soldiers having no physical, physiological, or cognitive limitations will be key to survival and operational dominance in the future. Indeed, imagine if soldiers could communicate by thought alone. Imagine the threat of biological attack being inconsequential, and contemplate for a moment a world in which learning is as easy as eating and the replacement of damaged body parts as convenient as a fast food drive-thru. As impossible as these visions sound, or as difficult you might think the task would be, these visions are the everyday work of the Defense Science Office. The Defense Sciences Office is about making dreams into reality. These bold visions and amazing achievements have the potential to profoundly alter our world. It is important to remember that we are talking about science action, not science fiction, end quote. So now we're talking about the Defense Sciences Office. I guess this is a portion of DARPA, or it's associated with DARPA. So here's more about the Defense Sciences Office. We'll get there in a moment. It says more about the Defense Sciences Office in a moment. But first, before we look at that, we're going to look at longevity. For the present, let us concentrate on the implication of soldiers immune to any sort of biological threat, say a particularly virulent strain of E. coli, or a genetic weapon targeting a certain race, or even a genetically engineered virus such as AIDS, engineered to accomplish in mere hours what normally is accomplished in years. DARPA's Continuous Assistance Performance, or CAP program, is also seeking that common ingredient to all pathogens, and thereby seeking a universal antidote that can interrupt all of them. In short, DARPA is seeking a sort of universal vaccine against any and all biological agents. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. DARPA. You remember DARPA was one of the primary funders of Moderna. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Let's continue. If this sounds familiar, that's because it is, for this universal antidote are precisely the claims for the healing properties of the alchemical philosopher's stone, which, in its elixir form, was said to be able to heal virtually any disease and to convey longevity. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So now you know why they're all about vaccinating everybody. Now you understand. It's about the alchemical transmutation of who and what you are. The alchemo-mineral man is what they seek to transmute you into, to make you more compatible with the artificial intelligence that they are developing. Let's read on. So now we're going to get to DARPA and the Defense Sciences Office's mission briefs. But what is the Defense Sciences Office? Quite literally, the DSO is a department within DARPA dealing specifically with realizing the transhumanist agenda in order to make the transhumanist super soldier a reality. It is, as its own members state, DARPA's DARPA, the cutting edge of the cutting edge. Gonna pause for a moment. So it's kind of like a secret society within a secret society. The Illuminati, folks. It's the same thing congruently with that. Do you understand how deep the deception runs in this world? Let's read on. It is worth pausing here to consider a possible historical antecedent to DARPA. Joel Guru aptly summarizes DARPA's mission brief in the following fashion. A project is regarded as DARPA-esque only if few others would tackle it, but it would be earth-jolting if it did work. If you don't have failures, you're not far enough out. DARPA managers view themselves as instigators. By the time something new is mainstream enough to attract academic conferences attended by several hundred researchers, the Defense Sciences Office usually sees its midwife work as done and moves on to new challenges. The mission brief of the DSO, and for that matter of DARPA, is social engineering, i.e. to engender enough interest in a particular research topic that a critical mass of human researchers is involved in the project to allow it to come to eventual fruition. Its role, in other words, is as a coordinating think tank, much like the Kammlerstab of Nazi SS General Hans Kammler during World War II. Like General Kammler's Kammlerstab, DARPA's chief role is as a project's coordinator to create a secret community of interaction between scientists secretly investigating radical concepts. It is, in some respects, a breakaway civilization, and the projects it envisions will, as we shall also discuss below, will lead to a serious schism, to a breakaway civilization within human society. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. Breakaway civilization. We have, in this world, a breakaway civilization. Whether people want to admit this is the case or not, this is what you might call the deep state, the secret government, the people who really pull the strings. They've used us in a parasitic fashion. We have the common people, and we have this elitist group that constitutes this breakaway civilization who vampirize us. They leech off of us our wealth and resources and our labor, and they use us to their own nefarious ends. And in secret, they've developed many technologies that they have available for themselves in certain circumstances that are kept hidden from the bulk of humanity. Now, with this being said, there are a lot of people out there who have researched this and have tied it to different agendas like ufology and the alien agenda and all of these other things. I don't know how much of that really holds true, but what I do know is most certainly you can argue that there is a type of a breakaway civilization of sorts in this world that seems to rule from behind the veil and pull the strings and get what it wants. It's a big club, and we're not in it. Let's put it that way. As George Harlan informed us. But let's get back to the reading. So it says, back to longevity. Certain organisms, tadpoles, starfish, even some lizards, have the ability to regrow a tail or limb that has been lost for whatever reason. Some DARPA denizens maintain that humanity itself once had, then lost this ability. But whether it did or did not is, from one point of view, immaterial, since genetic splicing techniques could conceivably isolate the particular sequence in starfish, for example, which could then be spliced into other organisms, humans, which would allow them to regrow or repair severed limbs or wounds. And that opens up the possibility, as we have seen, of a kind of virtual immortality, thus blurring the ancient mythological distinction between man and gods, and from a certain point of view, returning mankind to the divine status from which he descended according to certain ancient texts. Some go so far as to seriously propose lifespans in line with Old Testament texts, spanning hundreds of years, if not an entire millennium. The Grin technologies, in other words, are making the alchemical philosopher's stone, with its curative and longevity-bestowing properties, possible. For Ray Kurzweil, the promise of nanotechnology will ultimately enable us to redesign and rebuild, molecule by molecule, our bodies and brains and the world with which we interact, thus leading to the same inevitable conclusion: longevity and virtual immortality. This longevity, plus the linked technologies interfacing human biological intelligence with the interconnected non-biological intelligence of computers, and via this interface to other humans, opens up, at least as far as Kurzweil is concerned, the ability to socially engineer human society and institutions on a sweeping scale, in a true alchemical transformation of mankind, from his interior conscious and emotional life to its outward manifestations in society and civilization. As longevity increases, and as interconnected human knowledge increases exponentially, the distinction between work and play will disappear. But not everyone studying the alchemical transhumanist transformation of humanity is convinced that the coming longevity will issue in the inevitable increase and expansion of human knowledge. It was the physicist Max Planck who cynically observed that scientific paradigms change and progress when enough of the old guard dies off and a new generation, more open to new ideas, takes the reins. But with longevity, that prospect fades. This is, as Joel Guru observes, an intriguing hypothesis. If knowledge stagnates with longevity, the constantly exponentially increasing curve of human progress levels off as an unintended consequence of the singularity itself. However, there is another possibility, one that Joseph mentioned in his very first book, and it is based upon the well-known fact that all technologies come pre-packaged with moral and ethical implications for the kind of longevity being predicted by the transhumanists, and which is just beginning to come online, would mean one of two things for an individual in such a society. Either it would permit great moral progress in and toward the good, or great moral decay and progress in evil. Imagine an Albert Schweitzer or a Mother Teresa having thousands of years to do their work, or conversely, an Adolf Hitler or a Joseph Stalin, and one has a picture of the moral condition such a society might be in. Indeed, the bright and sunny future scenarios envisioned by some transhumanist alchemists is not the only possibility. There are other scenarios being gamed and predicted, and I'm going to pause for a moment here. This is one of the important considerations here. You see, they only want to give you the positivist outlook on these things, but look at the moral depravity in our society today. Do you really think that merging with an artificial intelligence, which, by the way, that has learned to deceive and lie to man now, and manipulate man, do you really think that's a good idea and that's going to somehow morally improve us? Think about that. How depraved has this world gotten? How far from ethics and morality have we fallen? What do you think the outcome is going to be? if this gets pursued? Do you think that we're going to have these good outcomes, progress in the good, or do you think it's going to be progression of evil? Well, I would say, just based upon what we're looking at today and all the warnings we've been given in the religious texts, that it would be this propensity towards the progress of evil so heinous that we couldn't even begin to imagine or speculate on it at this point. I think that's where we're headed. But here's 3 scenarios of the transhumanist apocalypse theater. There are actually 3 broad possibilities as transhumanists contemplate the future and the human society that emerges from the new technologies. Number 1, the heaven scenario, in which the emerging technologies pretend a benign and blissful future of longevity, of work as play, of sweeping extensions of human group consciousness not only globally but on a cosmic scale. Number 2, the hell scenario, in which the same technologies lead humanity to a catastrophic end due to accidental leaks of deadly viruses or cataclysmic wars utilizing the new weapons, or through simple inability of human society and humans to cope with the sweeping changes as old institutions break down under the technological weight and crumble into anarchy. And number 3, the prevail scenario. And it is, as might be expected, a mixture of the previous 2, full of promise to be sure, but also of reverses and setbacks, until ultimately humanity makes choices regarding the technologies and muddles through. The assumptions of the scenarios of the transhumanist apocalypse theater. All the versions of the transhumanist scenarios, however, have, as Guru notes, certain common features, and for our purposes, these are quite important, for they highlight, as nothing else does, the alchemical nature of their underlying assumptions. The first one: all predictive scenarios, no matter how elegantly programmed into supercomputers, are based on assumptions about the future, and to that degree are faith-based. Going to pause for a moment here, folks. This is probably one of the most important and salient points I've ever heard about any of this stuff. I'm going to read that again. All predictive scenarios, no matter how elegantly programmed into supercomputers, are based on assumptions about the future, and to that degree are faith-based. Assumptions. All of these computer simulations that they run are based on assumptions and are faith-based. And they call it science. So they can make some good, accurate predictions at times, but they could also be massively off of what they should be. And as an example of this, I will point out to the whole ESG movement. That's ecological social governance. This has led to the push in what's called DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in our society. And this was all leveraged against corporations beginning back in the 1990s. And we see what we have today. This is why you have massive failures of giant companies like Disney putting forward all this diversity, equity, inclusive nonsense with all of their social programming motifs in it, and massively failing because people do not financially support that. That's why properties like the Star Wars Acolyte program have been canceled. Nobody wants that garbage. They call it woke garbage. And this is all part of what was modeled in a predictive scenario in a supercomputer. They wanted to transform the way businesses operate with what they find important in this world. So they wanted them to become, what's the term, socially responsible. And this is where we got things like the green movement and where we're getting all of this diversity stuff coming in. And it's failing because they made assumptions in the programming of those models that are not holding to be true now. And it's beginning to fail, and they're beginning to see massive effects of this. So therefore you have companies like Disney hemorrhaging money by supporting this notion. They were given their marching orders to do this based upon these computer simulation models, and it hasn't come to fruition how they thought it would. So this is an example of how things like this are faith-based and made on assumptions, and those assumptions may not necessarily hold true. So that should be a warning for people. But let's get back to it. So it says, number 2, all versions of the scenario view human nature itself as an open, evolving system. In short, human nature is a transformative, information-creating medium, and to that extent, as we shall see in a later chapter, it is a mirror image of the physical medium itself, and as such is deeply and intimately connected to it. In short, human nature as a transformative, information-creating medium is itself the alchemical philosopher's stone. If it is this feature of human nature that allows the engineered evolution that is the central component to each transhumanist scenario. So I'm going to pause there. The human being is the gateway between worlds, folks. And transformation happens throughout the course of our lives and our experiences, because that's the nature of humanity itself. We are an alchemical creature. Let's make no doubts about that. But the alchemy that was taught in the original state of things has been so perverted and grossly misconstrued and inverted from what the original intention in this natural world has been, that it's become such a perverse scenario now that they're pushing to merge man with the machine. Let's continue. In number 3, all scenarios have certain limiting rules or defining parameters, the first of which, and most obvious, is that they must conform to all known facts. The second, all scenarios must identify those predetermined factors that lock future events into present or past developments such that the future is more or less predetermined. The third one, all scenarios must determine, identify, and adequately model critical uncertainties, or those logical possibilities that might occur within a margin of probability, and that are highly important if they do occur. Number 4, all scenarios must attempt to identify highly improbable occurrences or wild cards that would have tremendous impact if they did occur. Number 5, scenarios should attempt to identify their embedded assumptions, such as the points enumerated in this inventory, so as to be able to determine the indicators or early warning signals that a particular scenario is coming to pass. All scenarios are subject to certain types of predictive failures. The first predictive failure: the situation was more complicated than the originally modeled one. The cost-to-benefit ratio was inadequately modeled or not even considered. The projected future did not adequately consider new technologies and was overtaken by them, a significant difficulty since all transhumanist scenarios are precisely about future transformations by technology. Some adverse experience with a particular technology prevented its rapid expansion. For example, nuclear disasters such as Fukushima or 3 Mile Island have inhibited the spread of nuclear fission plants. Predictive scenarios that do not adequately consider human behavior. Guru cites the example of confident predictions a few years ago of paperless offices, as computers would eliminate the need for shuffling forms. As is evident from this list, each of the 3 versions of the Singularity, the Heaven, Hell, and Prevail scenarios, are all predicated on one common assumption, in addition to those enumerated above, and that is that one of the 3 will inevitably occur, provided that some cataclysm does not disrupt the curve of exponentially increasing technology, a cataclysm such as a killer asteroid striking the Earth or a nuclear or biological war. With respect to the 2 scenarios at the opposite ends of the spectrum, Guru notes that among the signs that humanity is entering the heaven scenario are an increase of unimaginably good things occurring, such as the conquest of poverty, diseases, or even an increasing popular use of transhumanist terminology, such as the term singularity itself, much like global warming, became part of the popular conceptual vocabulary of the end of the 20th and beginning of the 21st centuries. At the opposite end, the hell scenario, the warning indicators, or its beginning phases, would be that the growth of complexity begins to slow or becomes erratic. Unimaginably bad things start to happen, such as new diseases become rampant, or ideological or religious systems gain control over the advances of technologies and prevent their development, or weapons of mass destruction based on the GRIN technologies rapidly proliferate. In the middle, the prevail scenario, it would be indicated by early warning signs such as researchers voluntarily ceasing work on various research projects considered too dangerous or declining funding from corporations or military agencies with dubious histories, or ceasing work on projects deemed too fraught with human peril. And it says, we will leave the reader to decide which, if any, of these transhumanist apocalypse theater plays we are watching. But one thing should be evident: each scenario, as Joel Guru so aptly put it, depends upon the Promethean ambition of stealing fire from the gods, breathing life into inert matter, and gaining immortality. But this Promethean ambition, to literally unbind Prometheus in the alchemical engineering of enhanced humans, contains yet another hidden danger, namely the possibilities and dangers of a breakaway civilization enhanced versus normal humans. And we're going to drop it right there, and we will continue next time with this paradigm of the breakaway civilization. Because you see, it's always been engineered into this transhumanist philosophy, folks. Whether you realize it or not, it's always been there. That is the ultimate goal. And we've been warned about this. So at any rate, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and I want to remind you that I appreciate each and every one of you. We'll catch you next time. Have a good one now. The Alchemical Tech Revolution is sponsored by 80stees.com. Hi friends, if you're a Gen Xer like me, you've probably been looking for just the perfect shirt, referencing back to some pop culture event back in the 1980s and having a hard time doing so. Well, the good news is everything you could think of relating to 80s nostalgia is available now in a high-quality clothing line at 80stees.com. You can find all sorts of pop culture references from the 80s there, and it brings back a lot of fond memories for me. So check it out at the link in the video here below.